inclusive. But what I have in mind here is that I want to explain this in order to bring up this question of what are true values and how they compare to biological objective functions. Now you see, because our concept of objective function is based on past causal relations, and it does not require that anything happens always or for the most part. It requires only that it be the kind of thing which had certain consequences, long-range consequences, when it happened in the past, and which then got reproduced as a result. You'll see in a moment, in terms of an example, how to understand this, and I think it's actually quite intuitive. But just to show you that things don't have to happen always or for the most part in order to have the biological function they have, think of the example of spermatozoa. Spermatozoa, we can perhaps surmise, have as their function the fertilization of an ovum. That's what they're meant to do. But only one in hundreds of millions ever achieves it. So you certainly can't come to that conclusion about its function by seeing what mostly happens. For that matter, when you look at an acorn, one of Aristotle's favorite examples, what you should really conclude is that acorns are meant to rot and feed the pigs. And occasionally, accidentally and freakishly, then one of them becomes an oak tree. But it certainly doesn't happen always or for the most part. Something which Aristotle has to kind of pretend not to notice. So, the issue is not what it does for the most part. The issue is the effects that it has that allow us to say, well, it's those effects that it's meant to have. Okay, so let's do this in terms of an example. What is the function of the heart? The heart does various things. It circulates the blood, and it makes a sort of boom, boom noise. Now the question is one of those effects the function and the other not? Intuitively, the sound made by the heart, I mean, you could, there's always somebody to be found to say, oh no, that's very important because without the sound, the heart's beating, you know, children wouldn't learn elementary things and they could never be brought up to play the piano, and so on. But the fact is that what really matters is surely the circulation of the blood, and even if the heart was silent, the blood would still circulate. That is why we regard the circulation of the blood as the effect that hearts are meant to have, and not the sound they make. So, ancestral hearts, by circulating the blood, gave an advantage to the organisms that carried them, and this is why we have hearts in our bodies now. That is basically what it means to say that the heart is meant to circulate the blood. Now you'll notice that if this is a correct account, biological functions are completely objective. Unlike most other functions that we might judge, or most teleology, in which something is relative to someone's interests or intentions, this has nothing to do with anybody's interest or anybody's intentions. It is purely an objective fact, though of course it's debatable whether that is in fact a fact. In any particular case it might be very difficult to find out what the function is, but what it means to say that it's a function is just that the effects are such that the reproduction of that kind of thing has led to the presence of that organ with those effects, and that's what we call the function. So the circulation of the blood, but probably not the production of rhythmic sounds, is among the proper functions of the heart, and that's why we have hearts. That's what it means to say that this is the function of the heart. But now notice the crucial thing that follows from this difference between Aristotle and Aristotle's and our conception of function. The crucial thing is that objective functions are all very well, but they have nothing to do with what's good or bad, except in the trivial sense that it's good for the continued existence of a person that their heart functions correctly. But in general, something that has been produced in this way and has that function is not necessarily particularly good for anybody in particular, neither for an individual nor for a society or a species or whatever you like. The only beneficiaries of natural selection, that is to say, the only things which are reproduced for sure in exactly or almost exactly the same form is the genes. And so the genes are in fact the only true beneficiaries of evolution. And what that means is that nothing that is naturally the function of so-and-so is necessarily good for anybody. Now, the real reason for this, I'm not going to go into, but it has to do with the fact that when we talk about sexually reproducing species, we're actually talking about individuals that never reproduce. Sexual reproduction is a misnomer. There is no such thing as sexual reproduction. There is sexual production. But what is produced by sex is, in every case, an absolutely unique individual that is different from any individual that has ever existed before. You can quibble a little bit, you can talk about clones, you can talk about twins, but this is basically the situation. The only thing that remains the same generation after generation, to the point that we actually share some of these things with grass, are genes, bits of DNA, sequences of DNA. Those are astonishingly constant. And those are the ones that ultimately are either there or not there after whatever it is that happened that led to their preservation through these different individuals, each of which was completely unique, but carried, as it were, that legacy. Now, let's go back to this question. Having reconstructed this notion of function or teleology in an objective sense, does that suggest that we should go along with this moral principle that we should live according to nature? Now, I maintain that despite the popularity of such arguments, they are, as I said before, never any better than the lady in the plains argument that nature didn't intend us to drink while flying. They are always bad arguments, and most of the time they are actually completely dishonest. They're dishonest because even if you say that everything is natural is good, even if you say that you should preserve endangered species because they are part of nature, actually that's not what you mean. Sure, you want to preserve the eagle, you want to preserve, other endangered species, but do you really want, with equal passion, to preserve the smallpox virus? Surely, if God existed, the smallpox virus would just be yet another of God's wonderful creatures. And it's rather pretty. Actually, it seems better if you could turn off this part of the light. Can you see if that makes any difference? If you